And the US clearly felt they still had grounds, or they could just go ahead and do it anyway, to say, no, but you're not legitimately a Russian vessel, we're going to take you. And that does set quite a strong precedent.
Let's talk now at 9:42 about the murky world of dodgy oil tankers. Until this week, few of us really thought very much about them. The shadow fleet, they're known as. The US seizure of the Marinero has changed that. These ships are generally decrepit, dangerous, used to evade oil sanctions as well. Well, Emma Yeomans, who is Times News reporter, has been investigating. Emma, you're very welcome to the programme. Good morning.
Good morning.
Really interesting article in the Times today. You can, of course, read it in the paper or with your digital subscription at thetimes.com. Emma, just tell us what you found out, what you learned.
So I've actually been looking at the dark fleet for well over a year now, and this has been the week where it's been on everyone's mind because of these dramatic seizures now of 5 different shadow fleet vessels by the US. The shadow fleet is this enormous number of vessels, estimates between 900 and 1,600 ships around the world. And they are generally old. They are generally poorly insured, decrepit. We got some lines over from a former crew member who said the conditions on board are just awful. So they carry a huge amount of risk. And despite being in this quite poor condition, they are carrying vast amounts of oil. One of the tankers seized this week had carried 6 million barrels of oil for Iran in the last year alone. So they have played an enormous role in keeping the wartime economy of Russia afloat. They help Iran get around the sanctions. The money from selling this oil, this Iranian oil, goes back to help fund groups like Hezbollah and the Houthis. And they, of course, as we've seen this week, play a huge role in getting Venezuelan oil out of the country, much to the ire of Donald Trump. And yet up till this week, not much has been done about it.
Well, I was going to ask you about that because this is in the news because of the seizure that has happened. 5 seizures carried out by the United States, but they're very rare. Is this just the Wild West?
It is a bit of a Wild West, yeah. So far, the UK approach and the EU approach as well has really been to try and regulate these tankers out of existence. You know, if we tell them they have to declare their insurance when they come near us, if we tell them that we need more information from them, the hope is that gradually we'll make it harder and harder for them to operate. And that is true, except that attempt at regulation isn't followed up by a lot of action. I'll give you an example from this week, right? One of the tankers that came through the channel on Thursday, we deemed it a zombie tanker because it was broadcasting on its publicly available positioning system the name, the number, the signal of a vessel that simply did not exist. I looked it up. I looked up this number in shipping databases. It said this number has never existed. So it was broadcasting a non-existent vessel. And how can a ship that's entire identity is fraudulent be actually insured? How can it pass the tests that we ask these vessels to pass? How can it provide accurate information? And yet nothing gets done about it. It's still tracked past the UK, and that's because even when they're lying, getting to a legal point where we can say, yeah, we are absolutely solid that under the law of the sea, we can seize this vessel is still quite difficult. So this approach, regulate them out of existence, has really not had much of an effect on the shadow fleet so far.
It's fascinating you develop that theme in the article. You talk about sending out fake signals, stealing other ships' identities, going dark by switching off location beacons, and crudely painting fake names on hulls. They go from the very sophisticated to the very, very crude and basic, as you say. Not a huge amount can be done about them. Do we expect this just to grow as a problem? Because there are huge profits to be made as well, aren't there?
There are huge profits to be made. I think I saw one estimate that the shadow fleet has helped Russia profit to the tune of 150 billion in oil revenues last year. In terms of what happens next, this has changed the game, these seizures by Donald Trump. I spoke to a few maritime lawyers and shipping analysts who all said, so I'm going to focus on the Marinero to explain why these seizures mattered so much. Basically, to seize a vessel, we have to believe that the vessel is stateless, that the flag it's flying is false or just is meaningless. And that was very clearly true for the Marinero or the Bella One, whatever you want to call it. And then as it fled across the Atlantic, away from the US Coast Guard, it suddenly reflagged itself as Russian, which should have made it much harder for the US to seize it. And the US clearly felt they still had grounds, or they could just go ahead and do it anyway, to say, no, but you're not legitimately a Russian vessel, we're going to take you. And that does set quite a strong precedent that maybe we could be taking more action. But also it will put the Shadow Fleet on notice that these tactics, lying on their radar systems, lying about their names, repainting themselves, are not going to be tolerated for much longer.
Are there other countries that have done a bit better than America and the United Kingdom in tackling this problem? You write about Finland, Estonia and France in your piece.
I mentioned them, but bluntly, no. Finland detained a few tankers. Finland most notably detained a tanker called the Eagle S. It didn't just pick it up because it was a Shadow Fleet vessel, though. The Eagle S was suspected of cutting an important data cable in Finland by dragging its anchor, the S-link cable. So they took it to port, they arrested the crew, they investigated, but actually in October, about 10 months after this vessel was detained, a court said, actually, we can't prove that you dragged your anchor deliberately, and we're not sure we have any jurisdiction to do anything about you, so you're all free to go. So we can say that other nations have tried to intercept these vessels, but that doesn't mean they've been successful in keeping them or really stopping their activities.
What about the sailors on board as well? Some of them can be blacklisted if they actually talk about onboard conditions, but what have you learned?
What I've learned so far, and as you say, because of the blacklisting, it is hard to learn much about them, but it's pretty grim. My colleagues at Source Material spoke to a Ukrainian sailor, actually, who'd been hired on a tanker shipping oil for Venezuela. Don't think he really understood, he had any way of knowing, because he was hired through an agency, that he was on a Shadow Fleet tanker until he was there. He said the guy he was replacing had been taken off the ship after suffering severe burns in a small explosion on board, which gives you a sense of how dangerous these things are, that the crew were constantly running around carrying out repairs to try and keep the ship afloat, that there was very little to drink, there was very little to eat, the food they were eating was largely expired tinned meat, and he hated it on board so much that he said at one point he considered suicide just to get out of this vessel. But if they do speak out, they risk being blacklisted not just from the Shadow Fleet, but because there is a lot of overlap in crewing and agency work, from legitimate work as well, from legitimate vessels. So there's a huge amount of fear among sailors to actually say this is dangerous and this is scary.
Fascinating article, fascinating to talk to you, Emma. I've learned a huge amount about this issue that's really only come to so many people's attention this week. That's Emma Yeomans, their Times news reporter. You can read her piece, big investigation into all of this, in the Times today, in the paper or with your digital subscription at thetimes.com.